Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by AutoRescueTools.com and Isaac Rodell. If you are looking to get into module programming, but you are not sure what kind of laptop you're going to need or how to set it up for programming, Isaac is your guy. He can set up laptops specifically to do control module programming for specific brands with partitioned hard drives and all the software that you're going to need to do this. He also sells key cutting equipment, scan tools, and other diagnostic equipment. I bought some stuff from him in the past, and the support is phenomenal. So I highly recommend checking out the website. Again, that's AutoRescueTools.com. The link will be in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I will be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I've got a couple case studies for you today, both centering around the same subject and both recent vehicles. It is kind of weird in this industry where things come in waves. I think anybody who's been fixing cars long enough has experienced that. I know I have throughout my career. Is like you will get hit with 3 or 4 of the same job back to back to back, or like within a week or two, and then you won't see that job for 6 months at a time. We just had that with some Mercedes keys. Like we've done lots of Mercedes keys, but I think we went a good 5-6 months without doing any. And then last week I had 2 of them. The same day we did 2 of them. So that's just the way things work. And so these other 2 jobs, although definitely different outcomes, it was centered around the same thing. And well, no pun intended, but this is steering angle sensors, or the centering of the steering wheel. And both jobs we were called to in order to perform the steering angle sensor reset or relearn. Okay. Now, both of them ended up being interesting reasons why they would not complete, or they would not complete correctly. But that's why I'm talking about it on the show. So first one is a 2008 Volkswagen GTI. And the second one is a 2021 GMC Terrain. So we'll do the Volkswagen first, a little bit older. This problem, or the thing that I ended up finding, was our obstacle on this one is actually a known problem. It is out there. And that's where I ended up finding the solution, was by reading up on it and finding other people's posts. So you may have experienced this. You may be aware of this. If not, it is definitely something that you do want to be aware of. And I'll explain the situation that the shop was put in. And it's interesting how this wasn't necessarily a problem prior to being in the shop for a separate service. So again, 2008 Volkswagen GTI. It came into the shop for something completely unrelated. I think they were doing something with the transmission, but the battery got disconnected during that time. And pretty well known on a number of vehicles, especially European ones like Volkswagens, Audis, BMWs. They will lose the memory for the steering angle position sensor when you disconnect the battery, or you lose battery voltage. That's not anything new, not anything special. And this particular shop and this particular tech that was working on it, he's a real sharp guy. He has no shortage of tooling, and this is not anything new. But normally you would just do that angle reset after the battery is connected and you're done with whatever you're doing, and then you move on with your life, and that's it. This one would not complete, and he tried many different tools, many different methods. They even tried a new steering angle sensor on this one and was not able to get it to pass the relearn process. And again, he's using a number of different tools that should have been able to complete this job. So it wasn't just like a block of an aftermarket scan tool, which you can run into with Volkswagen Audi stuff. He knew how to do the actual learn. And there is some confusion on this particular GTI model when you go to do the steering angle learn, because you can run the learn, or at least attempt to run the learn, in a couple of different modules. And in fact, there is a couple of different learns. So what I mean by that is there's a steering angle sensor learn, or basic setting they call it, where you are going to turn the wheel back and forth and then take it on a short test drive. And that's actually the one you have to do first, because there is a second learn, which is the end stop learn for the power steering rack itself. Now, on this model, and it does depend on the version of ABS that you have, but on this particular '08 Volkswagen GTI, the steering wheel angle basic setting is done through the ABS module, even though you have an option to run it through the power steering. Now, if you're using Otis, it kind of guides you there. You don't need to know that. If you're using an aftermarket scan tool, it is important that you need to run this sensor learn through the ABS module. Okay, and then again, it's going to have you do the basic setting of that steering angle sensor, where you crank the wheel back and forth, and then you take it on a short test drive. Now, this initializes the steering wheel angle sensor. And interestingly enough, and this is something that you would want to know, if this steering angle sensor is not initialized and you look at the data stream in either the ABS or the power steering, you will see 0 degrees regardless of the position of the steering wheel. Okay, so without the sensor initialized, you won't see it move, even if that sensor is good. And that's a little tricky, but that's normal operation. Now, as I mentioned, there is another relearn to do in the electric power steering, which is the end stop learn. Now, this can only be completed once the steering wheel angle initialization has been done. And I didn't understand that immediately, and so I'm trying to do, both learns, like, okay, do I have to get one to pass before the other? Well, turns out it is that steering wheel basic setting. So I kind of left the end stop learn alone, because it wouldn't complete, and neither would the steering angle sensor initialization. But after doing some reading, you have to do the sensor initialization, then do the end stop learn. So I'm pushing the end stop learn to the side. I'm focused on that steering angle position. And I have Otis out. I'm using the factory tool. I'm running this a number of different ways, trying to get it to go, and I cannot get this to pass. Now, after attempting it multiple different times, multiple different ways, what I ended up realizing was that it is not completing on the drive test portion of the relearn. So as I mentioned, you begin the process, you're going to have some lights blink on the dash. I believe it's the ABS and it's not the steering wheel. There's a couple lights that will blink during this relearn process once it's being active. And you follow the prompts on the scan tool, you move the wheel, and then you drive, and you shouldn't have to drive very far. A lot of times this can be done in a parking lot. It's not a huge distance, but it needs to see the vehicle move in order to complete the initialization on this particular model. It's not true of all Volkswagen Audis. Some of them you can complete this step at a standstill, but it needs to see wheel speed in order to complete this. And when I was attempting to do this, could not get it to complete. Now, the tricky part is if you cycle the key, the relearn basically stops. And so at that point, you might think, okay, well, it's not, the lights aren't blinking anymore. Is it complete? No, it just stopped. And you'll have the code that indicates this, number one. But if you go into the data stream for the ABS module, there is a data PID that indicates the CAN bus signal of the steering angle position sensor, and it will say steering not initialized or sensor not initialized. So it says it right there in the data stream. The obstacle that you are still facing is that this sensor is not initialized. Now, I did mention that they tried another steering angle sensor, which, by the way, is up on the column behind the clock spring, and it's connected to the top of the steering control module or steering column control module. And this steering column control module takes the data from the sensor, puts it out onto the CAN bus, and then other modules just receive it, such as the ABS module and the power steering control module. So it is a message that's sent over a bus. So I had tried doing some coding or checking the coding of all three of these modules: steering column control module, the ABS module, and the power steering. I was wondering maybe one of them lost the coding, and that's what we're dealing with. Not the case. And again, tried many different ways. There's a couple different paths you can take through Otis to do this. Nothing I was doing was getting me anywhere. So ended up doing some research to see what could be the obstacle here, right? And also considering that this car didn't have this problem before the battery disconnect. So although it's possible, a broken part or something like that, I don't exactly understand what disconnecting a battery would do to this. But what I ended up finding when I did some searching online of these steering angle position sensor relearns that would not complete was that a lot of people were having issues with the wheel speed sensors. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. The link is in the show notes. And particularly, the problem was rust buildup on the tone wheel of these wheel speed sensors, or just a failed sensor in general. Now, a lot of the issues that I saw online, there were some on Identifix, there were some in basic Google searches, but that there would be a wheel speed sensor code or just a wheel that is not reading correctly, whether it be just not outputting a sensor at all. Maybe you have the wrong size tire or a flat tire, and so the wheel speed is different than the rest. And any of those situations would prevent the driving portion of this from completing. So you needed all four wheel speed sensors to be reading correctly and reading at all in order for the driving portion to complete. Otherwise, it would just not do it, and as soon as you cycle the key, the process stops. So I pulled those up as data streams, and I watched them as I was driving. They all look good to me in the parking lot. All four wheels, when I'm going straight, were at the same speed. They go up, they go down. Didn't see any dropouts on the scan tool. And the tech had actually looked at that too. He's like, yeah, I checked it, and I didn't see any issues with that. And so that seemed like a dead end at the time, but I was about out of time for what I had allotted that day. So I said, I'm going to research this a little bit more, and then I'll come back the next day. And that's what I did. And I looked a little bit more deeper into it. And I found a couple posts out there that were actually showing the scope captures from the wheel speed sensors in this particular situation. And I saw one that you can see the extra pulses or the interference from rust buildup on the tone wheels of these wheel hubs, and particularly the rear wheel hubs seems to be the ones that suffer from this the most. I'm sure you're familiar with the type of wheel bearing that has a round magnetic strip on it, and that rotates past the sensor and generates the pulses. It's a magnetoresistive style sensor that outputs a digital just on off slight change in voltage. And the rust buildup would cause these sensors to read inaccurately, and it could cause just slight disturbances in the waveform. So I texted the guys like, I'm going to come back tomorrow. First thing we're going to do, put this up in the air. We're going to scope these wheel speed sensors, spin them, and see what we get. So we do that. And once we got this thing up in the air, we could see on the tone wheel of the left rear wheel, it was really both rears, but the left rear especially definitely had a noticeable buildup of rust on there. And it was even coming into contact with the tip of the sensor. Like you could tell the tip of the sensor was actually worn down a little bit from the rust buildup on this thing. So, I mean, right there, like, okay, this is definitely screaming a problem. Let's take a look. Scoped it with the Pico, and you could see when you were rotating this wheel by hand that there was extra teeth, right? So if you picture a normal square wave where the high and the low pulses are in even length given, you know, a constant speed of the wheel, there would be little extra teeth or a break in a tooth, which to the module, when it's looking at that sensor, that is going to indicate a change of wheel speed, okay? Or just an error. Now, in this case, for this one, it wasn't setting a code. It was still registering wheel speed, at least via the data PID that I could see in the scan tool. But it was enough for the module to not see the correct wheel speed, or to see enough of a change in the wheel speed there that it wasn't allowing this process to complete. Now, I didn't have any ABS light on, didn't have any codes. Again, the data PIDs looked okay, but this incorrect output from the wheel speed sensor on the left rear, because of the rust buildup on the tone wheel, was causing this to occur so that I could not complete the basic setting of the steering angle sensor. So they got to replace the hub, the bearing, and then probably the sensor on that one as well. And then the right rear is also a question mark because it did have some rust buildup. The fronts seemed okay. You can't actually see the sensors as easily. They go into the wheel hub on that one, but they seem to have the correct output that we're looking for. But in this case, was the vehicle completely functional? Now, he had a pre-scan and he had no codes in the ABS. Did the customer have some issues with ABS lights popping up or ABS activations? Hard to say, don't know. It definitely was not in correct working order before it came to the shop. Is the system maybe more sensitive during this time when it's doing this calibration? Not sure. It is a problem. It's visible. You can see it. We obviously didn't cause this. The shop didn't cause this. It was there before, but because of something pre-existing on the vehicle, we now can't complete a process. And, we run into this in the automotive world a number of different ways. I had a case study a few months ago on a Chevy Malibu where we were trying to do an all keys lost. And prior to the all keys lost, the car ran. It was fine. The keys worked. But because there was pop spilled on a connector, the backup transmitter wouldn't work. And now it wasn't going to work for the customer, but they had no idea because they just use the key in the normal fashion. They're not using the backup slot. We get to a point where we have to do something on the car and all of a sudden we can't do it because of a pre-existing problem that wasn't obvious to the customer, right? Or they just didn't notice. Same thing, Toyota Camry couldn't program in a remote control. Well, somebody had taken the key in switch wires and just twisted them together so that it always thought the key was in the ignition, and part of programming a new remote to the system is to have the key out of the ignition, and it uses that switch to determine that. So we couldn't program this remote, right? Again, pre-existing symptom on a car that either was ignored or just not noticed by the customer, the owner of the vehicle, but now prevents us from being able to do part of our job. And that is real stuff. That happens. And as technicians, we want to be aware that there could have been something wrong with this car to begin with before we even started on it. It has nothing to do with us, but now we have to figure it out, right? We have to diagnose another problem in order to do the thing that we need to do on the car as far as our service goes. And that can be a tough thing to explain to a customer. Luckily, when you have visual confirmation, it's a little bit easier of hey, look at this rust buildup. This is a problem. Look at the pop in this connector. Look at these twisted wires. This was an issue. You just didn't notice it because. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Again, that one's a little bit older and well known. And so, you may have run into that. There's a few hits on Identifix, although most of those mentioned a code for the wheel speed sensor. This one didn't have any. There definitely wasn't any circuit codes or anything like that. All right. The next one is a 2021 GMC Terrain. Now, this one, the shop had the subframe down in order to do a transmission before we got involved with it. And they got everything back together, got the transmission programmed or whatever it was that they were doing. It may not have actually been a transmission. I don't know, but they had the subframe down. That's the important part here. And before they had the subframe down, there was not an issue, and afterwards there is an issue. So we can safely assume that they built this in. The question is, how do we fix it? Now, here is the issue. The steering wheel, when it shows the 0 position, is about 50 degrees to the right. Okay, what I mean by that is if you go into the scan tool and you look at the steering wheel position as a data PID, 0 degrees, which should be a straight steering wheel, is off to the right about 50 degrees. Now, they have been through this several different ways, right? They put it on the alignment rack. They did the toe adjustment to make sure that everything was straight there. They tried manipulating it so that, okay, we'll center the steering wheel. We'll move this here. Nothing they could do was getting the steering wheel to a straight position, though. They also tried a bunch of different relearns with the scan tool. Okay, is this something where we need to learn the 0 position? It thinks it's over here. We need to tell it it's over here. They went through all the tooling that they had. They were not able to do the learn. It would either fail or it would pass, but it would still end up in the same position. And so that's when they called us in, and they called us in for programming. They said, hey, we did this. We had the subframe out. The rack was disconnected. And now this steering wheel is off in a 50-degree position. So I come in and I try running the relearn that's available, and it's a steering centering procedure. And it even says in the procedure, like, you don't need to do this very often, but here's the steps, follow it, blah. And so we follow it. And what's interesting is this steering centering position will air out if you have the steering wheel straight. Okay, so I have the steering wheel lined up, go through the process, or, I end up in that straight position. It just airs, and it'll say like device exceeds limits or something like that. But if I put the steering wheel to the right about 50 degrees, and I can watch the data PID and see that, oh, okay, this is the 0 position here, then I'm able to get it to pass at that point. So it's happy. It's like, okay, this is 0. All right, center it up. All right. And then it passes the procedure, but you're still stuck with a wheel that's off 50 degrees. So as I'm getting into this, I'm thinking, okay, well, the way they connected something up has to be off in this case. And it's a 21 Terrain. I've never physically had any of these components apart. And so I was asking the technician, I'm like, when you had this disconnected, where did you disconnect it? And they said it was at the base of the rack, right? So you have the steering column, you have the intermediate shaft, which has a couple of U-joints on it. That intermediate shaft connects with a pinch bolt to the column and then down at the rack itself. And you can actually get to both of these bolts underneath the dash. You can see where it connects to the top of the rack. You can see where it connects to the base of the steering column. And again, intermediate shaft, couple of U-joints on there. And I asked them, like, can you put this on in multiple ways? Because that's what I figured they did. They just misaligned this thing, and we need to get it, back to its center position. And they said, no, there's only one way you can put the bolt on at the bottom. He's like, I didn't have it off the top though. I'm not sure if that one's splined or not, but at the bottom, it's one way. You can't mess this up. And so I inspected it and I verified. I'm like, yep, there's only one way to do it. So I looked up at the top where it connects to the column itself, and I couldn't really tell whether it was a one-way deal or not. It looked like it had splines all the way around. So I actually ended up disconnecting it here, and I wanted to do this for 2 reasons. Number one, I didn't know where the steering angle was actually coming from. There wasn't any real information about a steering angle sensor, right? It has a clock spring, but I didn't see a diagram for a sensor. Now, like in the Volkswagen that I just mentioned, the sensor's up in the column, and I was wondering, is this part of the clock spring on this vehicle, or is it maybe in the rack? Maybe that's where it's getting the steering angle position from, because you can look at it in different modules. You can see it in the ABS module, you can see it in the power steering control module, but where is that data coming from, right? Because that might help me to determine what part of this is actually out of misalignment. I have a feeling it's between, the steering column and the rack, but like, where's that measurement being taken? And then also, I just want to see, maybe they did get disconnected up top and, information was missed. They're not telling me all of it. I don't know. But if we can just rotate that to be straight, put it back together, that's what I'm going to do. So I disconnected here. And again, I do two things. I turn the wheel slightly while I am watching my angle, and it does not move. If I turn the rack and the wheels, the angle does move. So now I know that the angle is being measured in the rack itself. Okay, cool. That's good information to know. Now, I look up at the connection to the intermediate shaft and to the base of the column. There's only one way to put this on. You can't screw it up. You won't be able to slide it together because there's a big notch that only allows you to connect those one way. And it's the same thing down to the base of the rack too. So I'm like, okay, well, let me put this back together, because there is only one way to put this back together. Like, you literally cannot put this into the wrong position using the pinch bolts on either end. It doesn't allow you to screw this up like some other cars you definitely can. You can put it on any which way and then you're off by however many degrees you missed it. And there was even marks on both sides too, which I assume are from the factory. I don't know, maybe the technician did them, but those are lined up. You could see that, okay, these notches line up, these notches line up. That's how these go on, and they don't let you do it any other way. So put it back together and kind of start fresh here. Now I know that the angle measurement is actually being measured from the rack itself, but there is some sort of misalignment between the steering wheel and the rack, and it doesn't appear to be the one component that you can take off between the two of them. So I'm wondering, I'm like, did the rack get damaged? Is there something bent? And so I had them lift it up, and I'm looking at all the components to see, did the mounting get screwed up or something, or is there just something out of place? And everything looked good. And I even had him drive it over onto the alignment rack, and we did the toe adjustment together. Like, I sat in the vehicle and I held the steering wheel in the straight position. I had him, toe up the wheels, and we're still in the same boat, right? You can get the wheels straight, but the rack still thinks that the wheel off 50 degrees to one side is 0 when, it's off 50 degrees to one side. I did something else here just to see. I turned the wheel full stop one direction and then the other. And you can go 1.5 full turns to the right, 1.5 full turns to the left on a normal rack, on a normal steering wheel. And they even said that. They were like, we centered the rack before we put it back together here. We went 1.5, 1.5. Okay, right in the middle, here's 0. And the rack obviously, or the rack should know where center is because it's got the steering angle sensor in it, right? And so we made sure when we put this back up in here, it's in the straight ahead position. But the steering wheel doesn't bolt up to it unless it's turned to the right. And with everything connected, if you turn that steering wheel to the right, you can actually rotate it. When it hits the lock, that wheel rotates further than when you do it to the left, right? You can look at where it lines up with the shell around the column. And when you go to the right, you can rotate it about 50 degrees further. So I'm like, there is a misalignment here with how these are connected, but I didn't understand where that could be based on what they were doing, unless I was like, well, maybe there is some damage in the rack. I don't know how that would have happened, but something's goofy here. And so I was looking at that intermediate steering shaft one more time, and I was going to take it off at the base of the rack just to make sure, like, it looks like, because you can see where the bolt goes through and everything, and it looks like it's a one-way deal. Like, you're not going to be able to screw this up. But as I was looking at it, these intermediate shafts, they're two-piece, and it slides in and out of one another. And the reason I'm very familiar with this is if you worked on GMs back in the early 2000s, on the trucks and the cars, they would have a really noticeable clunk over bumps. And what it ended up being was the intermediate shaft, that sliding portion. And really, it's meant to collapse in the event of an accident when, the front of the vehicle gets pushed into the vehicle. That intermediate shaft absorbs some of the movement rather than having the steering wheel, get pushed into your chest. And so they are meant to slide in and out, but there's a little bit of play between them. And the fix was either to replace the intermediate shaft, or you could actually pump them full of grease with the trucks and get the noise to go away. And we did some of that as service. But when I would do those, you couldn't take those apart, meaning that you could take them out of the car, you could fill them with grease, you can slide them, in and out, but they wouldn't fully separate at the end. There was a stop in there. I think the metal was actually just pinched in a way where you couldn't fully slide them into two pieces. But I was looking at this one, I'm like, I wonder if this one can. Now, the way that these two metal pieces slide together is it has about 6 or 7 ribs around, and then the lower portion of this intermediate shaft splines into there essentially. So I took it off of the base of the column, and then I pulled, and then they pulled completely apart. Right. So now this intermediate shaft is now in 2 pieces. And I'm like, I wonder if I rotate this one to the left and I put this back together, are they going to slide in together? And it did. And then I put it back onto the rack, and what do you know? The steering wheel is in the centered position. So what happened was, when they disconnected the intermediate shaft underneath the dash, those 2 pieces, from gravity probably, slid apart, and when they were put back together, it was 1 notch off. And so there was a disconnection from the center of the steering wheel and the center of the rack due to this intermediate steering shaft being separated and put back together at the wrong index point. So I'd never experienced that before, and I wasn't even aware that piece could come apart like that, but it definitely can. So if you're dealing with one of those vehicles, pay attention, don't let it fall apart, but maybe you're getting one after the fact that has a steering wheel that's off center by that amount. Consider, hey, did someone have this apart? And even though the bolt up part of it you can't screw up, you can screw up how they go together if it comes apart. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I thought I'd share both of those on the show because they were a little bit time consuming on both of them to figure out. But interesting how they ended up being steering wheel angle positions within the same week. So that's all I've got for today's episode. I want to thank everybody out there for listening. With that out of the way, let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.